In qualifying, it was pretty much as we saw yesterday, Ferrari versus Red Bull. Ferrari with the advantage on this circuit. Monza set up really, and we saw how good they were at Monza. Very good on the straights. Good at Singapore too. Long straights there. Very good at high-speed braking. And that showed up today. Very, very close between Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. Charles didn't do a brilliant job in Q3. Went slightly quicker, but didn't get all the sectors right. It's that sort of circuit. You've got to get it absolutely perfect from high-speed braking. That's where all the time is won and lost, in my view. And I think the star of the day, therefore, was Carlos Sainz, who got so close to Charles that he actually pushed Charles into an error or two. And this after a day when he had that ridiculous shock of going over the loose manhole cover and having his car destroyed. And he although he qualified on the front row, just behind Charles, one of the best driving performances I think Carlos Sainz has ever put in, bearing in mind how good Charles is this weekend and how well he's driving the car. He's only starting P12, and that's I think that's a travesty of justice, to be honest, because it's absolutely nothing to do with Ferrari that he has this penalty, and well, Carlos either. And I think Formula One should look closely at that in terms of the regulations for next year, because if it's outside the team's control, such as an event like this, there's no way Sainz, as a driver, should take the penalty, let alone the team as a whole. So I think that's very poor from Formula One. Poor decision. I know they're standing by the rules, and there's not much they can do. Got a lot of time for Derek Warwick, who's the driver's steward this weekend. Derek, of course, drove in the first two Vegas Grand Prix in 81 and 82, driving for Tolman. Actually, I think he finished 10th, no points back in those days, but he would have been in the points by today's standards, and I respect everything obviously that the stewards have had to do, but they're going by the rule book, as distinct from the rule book needs to be changed, which is what we're saying here. So that's the first thing to be said. I think Max Verstappen didn't really get it together on that last Q3 run. He was trying too hard, which is an indication that he got the limit from the car on his first run in Q3. And I think that's probably what we saw yesterday on light fuel with the soft tyre. There's no doubt the Ferrari has enough margin in terms of its speed through the air, its top speed, because it doesn't have quite as much downforce as the Red Bull, inherent downforce I'm talking about here, not wing settings. And because of that, there's enough margin with which to play here around there, and I think they'll be in very good shape for the race as a result. But Max found the limit of the car very comprehensively and drove beautifully, I thought. And as we've seen already on full tanks, with a full load of fuel on the car, the Red Bull is a very, very quick package. So it'll be a very good race tomorrow, bearing in mind Max now starting from the front row, albeit on the dirty side of the grid. I'm not sure there'll be a lot of difference between the grip levels on the clean side and the dirty side. Long straights here. DRS obviously will bring the Red Bull a little bit further into the game in terms of top speed tomorrow. And it may well be the sort of thing we saw at Monza in terms of Red Bull versus Ferrari, and ultimately it will come down to time management, assuming there are no extraordinary variables like unbelievable number of red flags, which could always happen around here, or other issues coming in as well. So yeah, very interesting front row. And P3, to keep them honest, the effervescent George Russell, absolutely on the limit. If you wanted to watch any driver tonight in Vegas who would give you sweaty palms, it would have been George Russell. Absolutely on top of that Mercedes. In a way, sadly, I got to say, in a way, I don't think Lewis Hamilton could ever do now. He was full of enthusiasm yesterday for this circuit. And he actually used the phrase, it's going to be really good for racing and the DRS. I'm wondering whether he's regretting saying that now, because this circuit is just about straights, DRS. And if you like, from Lewis's perspective, it's about bravery and concrete walls everywhere, high-speed braking. Lewis just couldn't get the best from the tyres on his warm-up laps, and certainly couldn't get the best from the tyres when he's on his push laps. And it was sad to see, because obviously it's a pretty good car around here. I'm not saying it's as good as a Red Bull. I mean, that was a very good lap from George Russell, absolutely on the edge. And Lewis, quite rightly, really, for a 7 times world champion, I think not prepared to do that, because unlike other circuits this year when there have been tire temperature issues, Monaco, Barcelona spring to mind, there aren't any corners in Vegas where a driver like Lewis can actually start playing around with what he does with the car, maybe slightly longer corners, maybe brake a little bit later, get a bit more energy in the car when you load it up. There isn't any way you can do that in Vegas, and that's where he was struggling, because it's all about braking from high speed, and it's all about just making sure you get the car into the chicane and get a decent exit. And the sad thing now, he's starting P11 right in the middle of the pack, which is where you don't want to be in one of these DRS races where you're going to get stuck in a DRS train, assuming you get through the first lap without having your front wing end plate knocked off or the back of the car run into or something like that. And so it was not a happy day for Lewis Hamilton. I think it's another significant point. Also, a terrible day for McLaren-Mercedes after their great runs really since Singapore. But they've come here a bit like Monza to take downforce out of the car to get the top speed they needed in order to be competitive. They basically lost their ability to get the tyres to work, particularly in these cold conditions. We've seen when they can run a little bit more downforce how good McLaren are, but they still haven't got Red Bull's knack of giving them the top speed they need without hurting the downforce balance. And that's what's happened at McLaren in my view. They've had to take downforce out of the car to get the top speed, but now they can't get the tyres to work. And it showed with both Lando and Oscar Piastri. Oscar Piastri I thought did very well, very close to Lando on this occasion, but for both McLarens not to make it out of Q1, wow, this just shows how fragile it is with these ground effect cars from one race to another. It looks like Aston Martin nowhere in Mexico, unbelievably good in Brazil. McLaren, incredibly good in Brazil, nowhere in Vegas. And so it goes on, up and down the field. Pierre Gasly, P5 for Alpine. Really, really good performance from Gasly. He's been driving beautifully in the second half of this year, showing his true pace and his class, really, starting to show up over Esteban Ocon. Having said that, Ocon always quick whenever he was out on a relatively free lap in Vegas and got nothing but traffic in the closing seconds of Q1 and didn't even get out of Q1. A great shame for Alpine, but shows the quality, I guess, of Pierre Gasly's all-round weekend race management and his ability to get a lap time out of a car. So that will have drawn the attention, I think, of a lot of people in Formula One, this consistent pace from Pierre Gasly and his ability to put it together in the race as well. A big thumbs up for Williams-Mercedes, who qualified 6th and 7th with Alex Albon and Logan Sargeant. What a result for Logan Sargeant in front of the American crowd. A typically svelte lap by Alex Albon, but a really good lap as well, under pressure from Logan Sargeant, who's had a difficult time in the second half of the year. The pace is there, but he's had incident after incident, and he had a fair few of them building the build-up to qualifying as well. So he needed to put that to one side, get his brain settled, and just do the lap, and that's what he did. So great credit, A, to him, obviously. B, I think to the team under James Bowles, who've managed to keep his confidence and sustain the momentum of that pace and get rid of some of the errors. And C, I got to say Rob Wilson, who I think has also given him a much clearer mind of how to do the lap under pressure. So really, really good all-round performance. The only other team, apart from Ferrari, to have two cars in the top 10. So that says a lot about the way James Bowles has turned that team around and how good the Williams is now as a package around a circuit like Las Vegas. We've seen them put downforce into the car and lose top speed and still be relatively competitive. And now they're back at their sort of nirvana circuit where they've got that top speed they can use and enough downforce for the two drivers to do the job. So really good performance from Williams. Valtteri Bottas for Alfa and Kevin Magnussen for Dallara Haas Ferrari. Both made it through to Q3. Good job. I mean, I say that because both those teams have a habit of being very quick at some stage of a weekend, but not being able to sustain that pace. But at the moment, fingers crossed for both those teams, both those drivers. Nico Hülkenberg was also very good early on in qualifying. So as I said yesterday, the Haas looking very good. And Valtteri Bottas, if he can take this momentum through, looking at serious points tomorrow. When you watch Bottas in that black Alfa, it looks a little bit like Bottas in the black Mercedes days. And you still think, did Mercedes do the right thing in firing him and replacing him with George Russell? Not because George isn't quick. To reiterate the point, George is a quicker driver than Valtteri. Absolutely no doubt about that. But in terms of getting the best from Lewis, would we have had a different Lewis today if Valtteri had been in the other car? That's an unanswered question, of course. My opinion is yes. And I think the minute George starts to go quicker than Lewis, which he did in FP3 today, then you can see it eating into Lewis's self-confidence and doubt. And you could hear him on the radio saying, what is the margin? And when they'd say where George was, there would be sort of breath of, oof. And I thought Lewis's comment at the end, just to finish that off, I thought Lewis's comment at the end, I just couldn't go any quicker, was very telling. And maybe that's to do with the temperature he had in the tyres and the amount of grip level he had. But I think it was also, I gave it everything, and I can't drive like George Russell on a circuit like this. Sergio Perez, who looked quite quick on occasions when he was out there on a new set of soft tyres and everybody yet had to do their own runs, look pretty good in the other Red Bull, and in theory should be quite good on this sort of circuit. There's a lot of traction here, and he's very good at that. But it's also about precision under high-speed braking, and it's also about confidence in your own ability to get the car into the corner if you're slightly over the edge. And I don't think Sergio has that, compared obviously with Max Verstappen. And not to get out of Q2 was obviously a bad thing from Red Bull and Perez's point of view, but more than anything, I think probably underlines how good Max's performance was today in a car which wasn't as quick as the Ferrari around there. There's no doubt about that, but he still got the best from the Red Bull, unlike Sergio. And sometimes we just have to say, it just shows how good a job Verstappen is doing in that Red Bull. To some extent, you've got to say the same about George Russell in the Mercedes as well, although it's slightly different because Lewis is a very different driver to Sergio Perez and very different qualities, of course. Fernando Alonso fell away in Q3. They've got a very good car in terms of time management, probably in terms of balance, in terms of grip level, but in terms of top speed, they could be in trouble. But having said that, where Fernando's starting P9, I guess it is now, he will have the benefit of DRS early on, so he could put in a very good drive tomorrow if he can keep his tyres in decent shape and obviously make a good start into turn 1. So there we are. No really discerning corners on this lap of Vegas. It's all about top speed, it's all about high-speed braking, it's all about getting the tyres to work, cool temperatures, sustaining temperatures, even though the straights are very long. Tomorrow it's going to be a lot about DRS as well, as we see on circuits like Jeddah. And I think that's why you saw Carlos Sainz so close to Charles Leclerc, because a driver like Leclerc or Max or Lewis needs a couple of decent corners in order to be who they are. If they don't exist, they're going to have to do everything else through very, very precise judgment, supple inputs, getting the braking absolutely right from high speed, from 340 kilometers an hour. And yes, Charles did that very well. And yes, Max did that very well. But interestingly, Lewis today didn't do it very well. But he did it inside a margin. He looked okay in the car. He just did it inside a bubble in which he wants to operate as a 7 times world champion. And I don't think anybody should criticize him for that. Sad thing is he's got to start, as I say, in the middle of the pack tomorrow. And that's not going to be fun for a driver that came into this weekend really wanting to enjoy the experience. Anyway, we'll see tomorrow in this inaugural street race around Vegas. I thought it was interesting today on the world feed when in the middle of qualifying, whilst there was action on the track and laps being put together, the cameras were panning over the city, showing the neon lights and the strip, when we should have been seeing the action. You don't see that very often. This, to me, is a sign of liberty saying, look, we just got to push all we can about this decision to put on the street race downtown Vegas. It's more important than actually watching the cars. Well, it's not really, of course. But that's what we saw today, and it's an interesting reflection, I think, on the business side of this Vegas Grand Prix. But if you want to hear more on that and my thoughts, have a look at the video I did yesterday during or just after FP1 in that long lull between FP1 and FP2. But anyway, that was yesterday. Let's look ahead to the race tomorrow, see what happens. Charles Leclerc versus Max Verstappen on the front row. Carlos Sainz ridiculously having to start P11. Really feel sorry for him, but what a performance he put in today.